The good news this morning is from Matthew chapter 13. Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on the rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly. But since they had no depth of soil, when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And then when trouble or persecution arises on account of that word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30.
So for those of you who are here for the first time, just a personal note, this is me on a migraine and Cuban coffee. So this sermon is presented to you by Cuba. Anyway, so if I say anything regretful, I probably would have said it anyway, but now I have an excuse. Thank you, Andre. So anyway, it's great to have you guys all here, and hopefully God will speak in my limitations. But today I want to start with a little bit of a discussion. I often do that to kind of just get your brains going and to try to get a sense of where you guys are at with the topic. And so the first thing I want to ask is, what do you guys think about when you think of the word myth? Go ahead all at once now. No, I'm just kidding. No, one at a time would probably be better. Sabrina. Legends. Great. Awesome. A fib, as in something that is a lie. Mythbusters. Great show. Great show. And the nerds in the church rejoice. As the bear mentioned. A story. It's good. I saw a hand there. Did it go down, or did someone just move? Okay. No? Andre. A fish tale. Okay. Like Nemo? Or like a fishy tale. Like, I don't know if it's true or not. Anybody else had another one they want to contribute? Mythology. Yeah, the study of myths. History. Children's stories. Ooh, I'm glad someone said that. That's good. Okay, that's kind of enough. So, let's just have a poll here. If you consider a myth something that is generally not true, raise your hand. Okay, so almost everybody's hand was raised. So that's generally what we think of a myth, and you're all wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong, because that is generally what we consider a myth. Generally, it is something that is not true. That's how language does this to us. The language is maybe the only area in life that if you're wrong but popular, you become right. That's how language works. I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way, but you can say something the wrong way and be completely wrong, but if you can convince enough people to say it the same way, eventually you are right. Like, for instance, if the South rises again, takes over America, you all will be in the grammar books. We're going to do it. I say we now, I'm from the North, but you guys are going to do it one day, and it'll just be all. Or something that every person who is like me and probably on the spectrum gets really frustrated about is the word literally. Yes, literally has become literally my least favorite word because it is almost never used appropriately. In fact, I was watching a literary reviewer, a literary writer, right? And she was doing a review for a book. And she said the phrase, "This book literally ripped my heart out and slapped it on the page." To which I responded, "Call 911! Somebody call 911 right now! She is heartless, that woman! Heartless! She is dying, and that is a bloody book. Do not sell that book later don't buy that on Amazon. The heart was in the book. And you open it up and like, oh, it's a horror show, right? But of course, she didn't mean literally. She meant what? Figuratively, which is like no longer a word that matters because we just use literally. So now Webster's dictionary is actually having literary have two definitions. The original and the one that people have used so much it's become right. That now literally means literally, and literally means not literally. They write it differently in the dictionary, but that's basically the idea, is that there's something that's literally true, something that is actually not figuratively true, and then something that is figuratively true. And you can use the same word. It's confusing and frustrating, and this is the English language and why I have such a hard time with it. Yeah, we have alternative words and alternative definitions. But that's how it goes. So that's why I love studying etymology, the study of the origin of words, because you get the idea of the original concept. And the original concept of myth is not something that is untrue. It's not a fib. It's not something that is inaccurate. It's not even something that is non-historical. One of my favorite myths is the myth of Robin Hood. The myth of Robin Hood is a combination of the two kinds of myths we have, the historical ones and the non-historical ones. Robin Hood is kind of both. There was a guy, and they did call him Robin Hood, and he was under King Richard, but he wasn't as nice a guy as we have remembered him. So he's the one that he's become more of a hero figure when the reality he was kind of a villain, just a villain that gave money to poor people. And he did it out of selfish reasons. He did it so that they wouldn't turn him in, but we just remember that he gave us money. That's all. That's enough for us. Hero, okay? And we have the Robin Hood stories. But there are some myths that obviously are not historically true. Others of them are. And a lot of people that don't believe in Christianity, don't believe in the Bible, one of their big hang-ups is they say, oh, it's all just a myth. It's all a moral tale that is not historically accurate, which is an interesting criticism of Christianity because it's rather new. Most of the time, Christianity, if you had said that hundreds of years ago, people would say, who cares? Now, don't get me wrong, more and more as we've studied archaeology, we've found these stories are backed up by all of the history that we see. So for everything that we study and we learn, we find out, oh wait, no, these were actual stories. That actually happened. These are not just made up stories. This is literally, oh dang it, historically true. I need the new word there. But it's something that is historically accurate. We're finding more and more. But what matters is what is that truth that's hidden within. And this week we're reading a parable, which is one of Jesus' myths. So Jesus used these myths to conceal truth. And so we're going to have a few weeks where we're going to be talking about different myths of Jesus, different parables is the Christianese word for it. But we're going to talk about those, so I just want to start with the concept of what this is, the concept of these stories and why they matter and why they make such a big difference. Yeah, I've been criticized actually before for my sermons because I talk about movies so much. And people have said like, oh, I just kind of tune out when you talk about movies all the time because it's like, what do I care? That's just the fluff, right? But I was vindicated a lot, was it last week, 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, because Angela, who doesn't like movies, and when I quote movies in the sermon, I can talk about her because she's not in town. That's the rule, right? You could talk about people as long as they're away from you. No, that's not a good rule. But she gave her sharing, and in it she talked about Wonder Woman, the movie. And I was in the back going, vindication! And the reason she did it is because these movies, these are our modern day myths, and they have these stories of truth. Now, if we watch them and we don't pay attention, and we just kind of like are distracted, I should say, are distracted for 2 hours, we miss the message. But if we really pay attention, there's some wonderful things we can learn about life and learn about real truth. That's the thing that's interesting about history professors. You have two kinds of history professors. You have the dates people that make history sound boring. No offense if any of you are date history. And then you have the storytellers, those who convey truth through history. And that is obviously my personal bias here. But that is what Jesus is doing, and that is what I think we all should do with these stories. A great example of it is in the movie Steve Martin. It's Parenthood. And in this movie, there's this wonderful scene that I think about all the time with his mom, who's older. And older people are wonderful and have so much wisdom. Not that any of you fit in that category. But anyway, he was sharing about all the things going wrong in his life and how chaotic and frustrating it was. And then Grandma comes over and she said, some people like the Ferris wheel, but that just goes around. I like the roller coaster. It goes up and down and all around. And then she just walks off. And Steve Martin's wife, she just sits there and goes, wow, your mother is a brilliant woman. Steve Martin says, what? I here have real problems in my life, and Grandma comes with her nice Ferris wheel story, and now all my problems are solved. And his wife says, well, I happen to like the roller coaster, and I think your mom is brilliant, and walks away. And then Steve Martin looks out in the window, and he says, oh yeah? If she's so brilliant, why is she sitting in the neighbor's car? But my point in telling you that story is because we don't want to be Steve Martin. I don't think Steve Martin even wants to be Steve Martin. But we want to be the people that listen and understand because we're applying this to our life. That when we're listening to these stories, whether they're the historically accurate stories or not, they're stories that convey truth. And if we can apply them, we can grow in wisdom and understanding and learn what's most precious and valuable. And we're going to be talking about precious and valuable things in the next couple weeks especially. But I want us to, and in fairness to Steve Martin, he eventually gets it. And there's this great scene where he's having everything go wrong, and you see the camera start to shake, and you see hear the sounds of a roller coaster that and all of a sudden he gets it. And he sits there in the chaos, and he smiles. He realizes life is not about controlling or organizing or having that just basic planned out life like the Ferris wheel. But real life is going on that thrill ride, that adventure of the roller coaster. So with that, I want to talk about today's reading. And today's reading, we are hearing about the sower of the seed. And listen, as someone who's got extensive gardening experience as I grew one carrot once, I know this basic fact about gardening. It matters where you plant it. I know, it's impressive. Yes. I'm going to write a book later. And what's weird to me about this story is that God is the gardener. God is the sower of seeds. And he seems to not know this basic fact. I don't know what it is. I seem to know something that God doesn't. Because why is he throwing these seeds everywhere? Like, if you had seeds, would you plant them on the concrete pavement over there? Anybody? Well, apparently God does. Liz would. Thank you, Liz, for that one. Okay, God does. And so my first question when I'm thinking about this parable and trying to just work my way through it is, why? And so what I've come up with, and this is just my theory, could be wrong, is that God is expressing in this that he is giving everybody a chance. A lot of people share this parable and they say, this is a parable that's talking about how we should be planted in the right soil. And we need to plant ourselves in the right soil. The problem with that is it doesn't work that way. A seed cannot plant itself. Okay, right? It gets planted. You didn't choose what family you were going to get born into. You didn't choose what neighborhood you were going to grow up in. You didn't choose how you were going to be treated from 0 to 5, and psychologists say that's where our most formative years are. So when I first talk about the first category, which is those who fell on the pathway, the pathway here, okay? So those who fell on the pathway, this is the case. Some of us, we had hard, difficult lives from the get-go. We were put in this place where it was packed down. They didn't have these kind of bricks back in the day, but what they had, it says it's the packed soil. And how does soil get packed? Anybody have a guess? It gets walked on. Don't tread on me. Well, this ground had been walked on so many times that it became so packed down that the seed could not get through. And what I want to point out in this is something that is a difficult, challenging, but important lesson for everyone who's gone through these kind of victim experiences where they've been tread on over and over. And God, I believe, gave it to me as an insight when I was really young and first had a girl come to me and share with me a story that she hadn't told anyone before about her being raped. And I just heard myself saying this, and I thought only later how brilliant I feel like it was. I mean, maybe, but it was this. It is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. See, there's this lie that people that have gone through those kind of experiences tell themselves eventually because they feel like it's on them, it's their burden, so they start to tell themselves that it was their fault. That they must have done something to deserve it, that it must have been God's will maybe even, but that's not God's will for anyone. And I want to be very clear about that. God gave us freedom of choice, and unfortunately the consequences of that is that people have done horrible things to other people. But when we have those things happen, it's now our responsibility. And we can chip through that soil. We can dig into it. We can take that shovel and break it up. And then the ground becomes good soil again. There was this great moment that I love in this news report on this woman that had gone through one of the most horrible experiences anyone could go through. Now, she wasn't there. It was a woman newscaster and a man, not that that matters, but the woman newscaster was saying how this horrible guy who did this thing to this woman, he has ruined her life. And I love because the guy newscaster like broke character. Like he wasn't reporting the news anymore. He was correcting that other news anchor. Because he said, don't you dare say that. Their lives are not over. There's always hope. They can overcome. God is giving his seed of truth to every single one of us. He wants us all to have a chance to experience his love. And those of you who have been built into this difficult, this packed down, beaten up road, I am so sorry that you've gone through that, and there's nothing that I can say to help that, but I can share with you that there is hope. I've seen others overcome. Break into that soil, even if it's painful. Take at it with a chip axe, shovel, whatever it takes, but don't give up because there is good soil underneath. Amen. All right, now I want to talk to another group here. So this has got the rocks. Okay, now this is rocks and soil, but I just have rocks here. Yeah, rocks out. Okay. Anyway, this is for the people that are very passionate, the people that are very emotional, and they hear something and they're inspired and they're like, yes, let's do that. And then 30 seconds later, they're like, it's time for a nap. Sometimes we will have people that are really good at getting us excited for the moment and saying, like, you got to turn to God and, and everything. And we hear these great messages and it inspires us and we say, yes, and then the next day, where are we? Well, one of the things that happens often with people that are never really fully break through, never really fully change their lives, is that they are on a good path, but there's this certain point where the sun comes in this analogy. Other versions have the storms, right? But it's when things all of a sudden get hard. I was outside yesterday, and the sun was beating down, and my translucent skin was sizzling. And I was like, ah, right? So as the vampire that I am, which, by the way, I say jokingly, but we did have a youth kid that really authentically thought that Kate and I were vampires. And it was like a funny joke for like a long time, but then we found out that after our wedding, she Googled, can vampires cry? Because she saw us crying and she was like, maybe they're not vampires. I don't know, can vampires cry? She Googled that. Yeah. But anyway, I can understand these withering plants in that moment where the sun is beating down. And what matters then? What matters in that moment? Water would help. Roots, though. Roots are what matter. What matters is what's happening underground. We often in our life are focused on what we can see, what we can observe. We look at someone who's got a nice car and we think they're financially well off, but then, you don't know what's underneath. You look at someone who's got a nice, tie and suit and we think they look really nice. They must be a man of character. Well, we don't really know what's underneath. We don't really know until we get down. And by the way, when that reveals itself in individuals is when difficulty comes. How are they going to respond? I've heard many people, and you can count me in them sometimes, who are able to give motivating messages about how to change your life. But behind closed doors, their life is a mess. I'm sorry for offending you, Mark. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, buddy. Anyway, so the point is that we want to see what's under the surface. Anybody hear the story of the aspen trees? The aspen trees were thought for a long time to be separate organizations, separate organisms. But then eventually they found out that underneath they were all connected. And they're actually the largest living organism that we know of is the aspen tree, really. Because in their roots, under the ground, they have tied themselves together until they are like one. And I believe this is a great illustration for what Jesus is asking for us when he says, be one, like the Father and I are one. He wants us as brothers and sisters to be going on this journey together, intertwined, where when we have the storms of life coming and we're going through difficulty, we reach out and we branch out and are tied together. And so when you are weak, I am strong. And when I am weak, you are strong. And we lean on each other. And when that happens, then it doesn't matter if there's a dry spell over here, because the roots go so far over there. And that's what God wants for us. And that's the key to not wither when the sun comes. Dig those roots in deep. Okay, so the next is, what is the next? Oh, yes, the next. You know, they say every rose has its thorn, but not every thorn has a rose. Sometimes it's just thorns. And this one is about the thorns that grow up along the plants. We're going to talk more about this in another week. But here's my point for us today. These are the cares of this life. It comes on us, as Jesus says in another verse, like a trap. It comes on us when we least expect it. And I love that image because I think it's so true. Like we'll be waking up in the morning and we'll be like reading our Bible and like, okay, I'm going to be starting off my life with God and everything like that. And then like get in our cars and we're driving and someone cuts us off and like, cares of this world, you know, and just immediately we lose it. One of people's favorite illustrations that I use is a story of my life, and I think it's because they love seeing me mess up. But I was late to the airport, and Kate and I were just in this bickering moment where we're just angry at each other for everything, and we're right. And then all of a sudden, we're going to the toll booth, and this person cuts us off in front of us. And not only do they cut us off, but they have one of those Jesus fishes on their car. And at that moment, Kate and I, we were unified for the first time in the morning in our rage. They call themselves a Christian. And I did this fist thing. As those who have heard this before know, I'm a pastor, so I don't have the middle finger up, but I'm thinking it. Right? And I'm just there like, oh, I can't believe they would cut us off. So we get to the toll booth. And we go to give our money to the toll booth operator, and he says, the car in front of us paid. And at that moment, we had humility. Oh, what great examples of Jesus are they? God bless them. But that's what happens. We get wrapped up in the cares of this life, and it's ridiculous. Even if they were just cutting us off, they could have been rushing to someone that in need. You never know. You can't judge, right? But we get so bogged down in what we're going through, and we lose perspective. And that's what happens when these weeds of our life, these cares for these frivolous things, we care about, again, the car we drive or the suit we wear. How silly is that? You can be buried in a really nice suit, and guess what? You're not going to care. It doesn't matter. But what's so important of this life is the soil, the dirt. Now, I'll admit to you that I didn't have any great soil because that one gardening experience of getting the carrot didn't go very well. I just had one carrot. But I do have coffee beans, and so I just use coffee beans. They look like soil. So I got some. So I've got some ground up coffee beans that's already been used. Otherwise, it would not be worth it for the illustration. But this is the last kind of soil. And one of the things that I want to share about this is, how many different kinds of soil are there? Wow, you guys are really good guessers. Okay, let's try this again. How many kinds of soil are there? 4. There we go. Thank you. All right, good. So how many are successful? in this story? 1. Which means 3 out of 4 is not. 3 out of 4 don't actually produce. And my point in sharing this is that so many times we can focus on failure in life. And so many times we can see how we failed more than we succeeded, so we're a failure. But that's not how actually success works. It's like finding the right one to spend the rest of your life with. You don't have to have a great track record. You don't have to have a great percentage rate. As long as you're right once, right? Then for the rest of your life, you're right. I picked a lot of not-so-winners in my day, but I was right once. That's all I need, right? Just once. And the success works that way. You can fail 1,000 times. By the way, another way of looking at failing 1,000 times, it's called practice. When you're trying to learn a song for the first time, maybe we don't think of it as failure, but you play it imperfectly for 1,000 times, and then eventually you can play it to perfection. That's practice. So when you failed in your life, don't beat yourself up, but remember, that's practice. And this soil, by the way, now I did a little bit of, what are they, oh man, I'm blanking on the term, when you're putting your trash, composting, yes, thank you. Oh, good, Brad, thank you. All right, I did a little bit of composting. I actually did even, it's like vermi composting or whatever, worm composting, but what? I don't know, maybe. You know better than I do. Anyway, the point is that this worm composting, it's actually the worms that produce the soil. And my point is that what happens is you take all this stinky stuff. This is how real good soils. I mean, you think of the good soils, the people that like they were sitting pretty. They were born into wealth, But the reality is the rich soil is that where there's all this like good trash, all this good junk, all this good nasty, horrible, like gross stuff that's got all these worms in it. It's beautiful, isn't it? And one thing that's interesting is, like when you start to composting, the first thing that you notice is the smell. It smells like trash. But as the worms do their work, it eventually stops smelling and starts smelling like rich soil. This rich soil. What the worm's doing, and I'm sorry, there's no way to talk about this that's not gross. But what the worms are doing is they're eating the trash and they're pooping gold. Right? That's what they're doing. These worms are wonderful. They look ugly, but they're amazing. And my point is saying this is that is difficulty in your life. The tragedies of your life. It smells, it is gross, and you're like, oh, I don't want that around me. But if you allow those worms to do their work, those worms of truth, those narratives of story that's bringing out richness and meaning from these horrible tragedies in your life, then eventually it produces gold. It produces rich, the very bedrock of nutrition. I don't know if you've known this because, the grocery store, you have no evidence of it, but fruits and vegetables are actually grown through soil. I know. I've discovered this in the last couple weeks. It's amazing, right? It comes from dirt. Even the ones that come from trees, like the trees are rooted in what? Dirt. And we eat and we live and we have healthy vibrancy of life. And scientists have made food that tastes better than nature, arguably, but they haven't made food that is healthier than nature. That is the vibrancy of life. And such in the same way, deep in this story, deep in your story, is this amazing gold, this amazing treasure of life. Now, you'll never discover it if you just push it away. if you push your story away, the hard parts, the dirty parts, the trashy parts. You know, by the way, I've heard, and I don't know all the details, but I've heard basically they're having a problem with our recycling because we've got so little real trash in it that it's not good enough of a mess to make rich nutrition out of, rich soil. We need more filth in it. And I know most of you can't relate to that in your own life. You've got plenty of filth in it. But this is what we need, right? The ingredients to make something of worth is we need that dirt, that trash, that smell. And then we need to process it together as a family and to go through and to search after it. Now, in these, where's the Bible? In these books are written these stories. And these stories, many of which are historically accurate. And some of them are not, like the parable of the sower of the seeds. That is a parable. I mean, it might have really happened. It doesn't really matter. I mean, there might be a sower through on roads because he was that bad at gardening. I don't know. But what matters is the truth that we enrich our lives with. And so when we go through these books, when we go through these stories, when we go through this community together, dig in, dig through, grow roots. And if you've had that pathway, that beaten down, tear through it and go down. And if you find a rock, what do you do as a gardener? You dig that rock up and you throw it away. And then you go deep down into the dirt, into the soil, and you find meaning. I don't say this because I'm such a good speaker. I say this because I'm talking about God's love here. But what I'm really encouraging all of you, here in this place is the richness of life. In these walls, through our relationship, through our community, through God's love, through God's truth that we reflect on each week, there's the richness of life. Through the lives of those little ones that come in and the examples that we have of love, there's the richness of life. So dig deep. Let's not be Steve Martin. Let's not go through life and never dig deep. Let's get some roots. Let's go through that trash and let's produce a harvest. 1 out of 4 was successful, but you know how successful it was? 100, 1,000-fold. That when that harvest is produced, when that good soil is found and the fruit comes, man, it flourishes and it grows like wildflowers. And so in your life, when you figure out that truth of God's love, it changes everything. And the whole landscape changes of your life. Let's pray.